On October 12th, 2014, 17,290,000 people sat down on a Sunday night and watched a group of fictional survivors escape a cannibal compound in a place called Terminus. It was the Season 5 premiere of The Walking Dead on AMC, an episode called No Sanctuary, and it was the most watched episode of any series in the history of cable television. Not just horror, not just drama, any series, 17 million people, all watching the same show at the same time, all completely invested in whether Rick Grimes and his family would make it out alive. 8 years later, on November 20th, 2022, the series finale of The Walking Dead aired on that same network. Approximately 1.4 million people watched it. That is a 92% decline in live viewership. The show that had once dominated Sunday nights, the way the NFL dominates Sunday afternoons, had quietly bled out over the course of 6 seasons, losing viewers by the millions, losing its lead actor, losing its showrunner, losing the trust of an audience that had once treated it like appointment television, and finishing its run in front of a crowd that would not have filled a mid-sized football stadium. Today, I want to argue that The Walking Dead was not killed by zombie fatigue. It was not killed by a genre running out of ideas. It was killed by something much more specific and much more preventable. It was killed by a network that treated its most valuable creative asset like an ATM machine, by a revolving door of showrunners that gave the series 4 different creative visions in 11 seasons, by a series of catastrophic storytelling decisions that broke the audience's trust in ways that could never be repaired, and by the fundamental tension between making great television and making profitable television, 2 things that look similar from a distance but are almost never the same thing up close. This is the story of how the biggest show on cable television destroyed itself. And it starts, as all the best stories about failure do, with everything going impossibly right. But before we begin, if you could just take a moment to subscribe, it is completely free, and it genuinely helps this channel more than you know. Anyway, that is enough of that. Let us get into it. The show that was never supposed to work. There is a version of this story where The Walking Dead never gets made at all. Not because the idea was bad, but because nobody in television in 2009 thought a zombie show could work as a serious weekly drama on a cable network. Zombies were B-movie material. They were cult midnight screenings and low-budget horror films, and George Romero retrospectives at film festivals. They were not what you built a flagship television series around, especially not on a network like AMC, which at the time was riding the prestige of Mad Men and Breaking Bad, and had positioned itself as the home of sophisticated, character-driven drama. The source material was a comic book. Robert Kirkman had started publishing The Walking Dead through Image Comics in October of 2003. He was 24 years old. The comic was not about zombies in the way that most zombie stories are about zombies. It was about people. It was about what happens to human beings when the structures that hold civilization together disappear overnight. And the only thing standing between you and oblivion is the group of strangers you happen to survive with. The zombies were the backdrop. The humans were the story. Kirkman would keep writing that comic for 16 years, producing 193 issues before ending it with a surprise final issue in July of 2019 that nobody saw coming. But we will come back to that. The person who turned the comic into a television show was Frank Darabont. If you do not know the name, you know the work. Darabont directed The Shawshank Redemption in 1994 and The Green Mile in 1999, 2 of the most beloved films in American cinema. He was not a television director, he was a filmmaker, and he approached The Walking Dead with the sensibility of a filmmaker, which is both the reason the show worked as well as it did in its first season, and the reason everything that happened behind the scenes was about to go very, very wrong. AMC officially ordered a pilot in January of 2010. Filming began in Atlanta, Georgia on May 15th of that year, and by the end of the summer, AMC had ordered a full 6-episode first season. The budget was reportedly around $3.4 million per episode, which for a cable drama at that time was substantial. Darabont used every dollar of it. He hired cinematographers who shot the show like a film. He built practical sets. He invested in prosthetic makeup and practical effects supervised by Greg Nicotero, who would go on to become one of the defining creative forces behind the show's visual identity for the next decade. The first episode, Days Gone By, premiered on Halloween night, October 31st, 2010. It drew 5.35 million viewers, which was a record for AMC at the time. The episode opened with a sheriff's deputy named Rick Grimes, played by English actor Andrew Lincoln, waking up alone in a hospital bed to discover that the world had ended while he was in a coma. He stumbled through empty corridors. He found the cafeteria doors chained shut from the outside. He walked into daylight and saw hundreds of bodies wrapped in sheets, arranged in rows across the hospital loading dock. If you were alive and watching television in 2010, you remember what that felt like. Nothing on cable television looked like that. Nothing on cable television had ever opened with a sequence that quiet, that cinematic, that committed to letting the horror speak for itself without a single line of dialogue for nearly 10 minutes. Darabont had made a film and called it a television pilot, and the audience responded immediately. The first season was only 6 episodes long. 6 episodes to establish Rick, his wife Laurie, his son Carl, his best friend Shane, and the small group of survivors camped outside Atlanta. 6 episodes to set the tone, build the world, and prove that a zombie show on basic cable could be taken seriously as drama. The season ended at the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, where the survivors briefly found shelter before learning that the building was about to self-destruct, a sequence Darabont directed with the kind of tension and visual scale that most cable shows never even attempt. The first season worked for a very specific reason, and it is the same reason that the show's decline would eventually become so painful to watch. It worked because the person making it cared about it as a piece of filmmaking, not as a piece of content. Darabont was not thinking about merchandising opportunities or franchise extensions or how many seasons the show could sustain. He was thinking about how light fell through hospital windows in an empty world. He was thinking about the sound design of a man's footsteps echoing through corridors that should have been full of life. He was thinking about what Andrew Lincoln's face looked like when Rick Grimes realized that everything he had ever known was gone. That care was visible in every frame of the first season, and it was about to be the first thing AMC took away. Because what nobody in the audience knew while they were falling in love with this show, while they were telling their friends about it, while the ratings were climbing episode by episode, was that behind the scenes, the relationship between Frank Darabont and AMC was already falling apart. The network had seen the numbers from season 1. They had seen what they had, and their response was not to protect it. Their response was to extract from it. AMC told Darabont that for season 2, the show would get 13 episodes instead of 6, more than double the output, but the per episode budget would be cut from $3.4 million to $3 million. And the network intended to keep the tax credit the state of Georgia offered for filming there, which effectively reduced the actual production budget by about 25%. More episodes, less money per episode, and the network skimming from the top. Darabont, by his own account given under legal deposition years later, described what followed as crisis-level problems during production. He was trying to make the same quality of television with significantly less money and significantly more episodes, and the pressure was immense. His emails during this period, which were later released as part of legal filings, are the communications of a man who felt he was watching something he cared deeply about being slowly strangled by people who did not understand what they had. In July 2011, midway through production on the second season, just days after participating in the San Diego Comic-Con panel where he promoted the show to thousands of fans, Frank Darabont was fired. AMC's lawyers later stated the termination was due to his erratic and unprofessional performance. Darabont responded by filing a lawsuit against AMC, seeking $280 million in damages, claiming breach of contract and alleging that the network had deliberately manipulated the show's finances to reduce his profit participation. That lawsuit would drag on for nearly a decade before AMC settled it in 2021 for $200 million. $200 million. The man who created the show, who directed its first episode, who set the visual and emotional tone that would define the entire series, had to spend almost 10 years in court to get compensated for his work. Within a day of Darabont's firing, Glenn Mazzara, one of the writers who'd been on staff since the first season, was announced as the new showrunner. The Walking Dead was about to enter its second creative era, and the audience at home had no idea that the man who made them care about Rick Grimes was already gone. They were just watching a show they loved, waiting for the next episode, completely unaware that the first domino had already fallen. And that is the thing about the decline of The Walking Dead that makes it different from the decline of almost any other show. It did not start with a bad episode or a bad season. It started with a corporate decision made in a conference room by people who had looked at the most promising new drama on their network and decided that the appropriate response was to cut the budget and fire the creator. Everything that followed, every bad decision, every lost viewer, every broken promise to the audience, can be traced back in some form to that original sin. The moment AMC decided that The Walking Dead was a product to be optimized rather than a show to be protected. The golden age of The Walking Dead, and there absolutely was a golden age, runs from roughly the second season through the fifth season. Different fans will draw the lines differently. Some will include season 6. A smaller number will argue the first season stands alone. But the general shape of it is clear, and it maps almost exactly onto the period when the show was growing from a promising newcomer into the most dominant force on cable television. To understand why the show's decline hurt the way it did, you first have to understand what made these years so remarkable, because the golden age was not just good television. It was a specific kind of good television that had never really existed in that form before, and once it was gone, nothing quite replaced it. Season 2 premiered in October of 2011, with Glenn Mazzara now serving as showrunner, following Darabont's departure. The season took place almost entirely on Herschel Green's farm in rural Georgia, and the pace slowed considerably from the first season's more cinematic approach. At the time, a vocal segment of the audience complained that nothing was happening. Too much talking, too much standing around, not enough walkers. They were wrong, but they were wrong in a way that is easy to understand. What Season 2 was doing, underneath all that apparent stillness, was building a pressure cooker. Shane Walsh, Rick's former partner, and the man who had been sleeping with Rick's wife Laurie while Rick was in his coma, was slowly unravelling across 13 episodes. The tension between Shane and Rick, played by John Bernthal and Andrew Lincoln, with a specificity that neither actor would fully get credit for until years later, was one of the finest sustained character conflicts the show ever produced. Shane was not a villain. He was a man who had kept people alive when Rick was gone, who had genuine feelings for Laurie, who had done terrible things for understandable reasons, and who could not accept that Rick's return meant the end of the authority he had earned. That is a genuinely complex dramatic situation, and the show played it with patience and intelligence. The mid-season reveal, the moment Herschel's barn doors opened and the group discovered that Sophia, the little girl they had been searching for all season, had been dead and walking among Herschel's collected walkers the entire time, remains one of the most devastating moments in the show's history. Rick stepping forward and putting her down, while her mother screamed, was the show declaring what it was. This is a world where hope is the cruelest thing of all, and the people you're trying to save are sometimes already gone. Season 2 ended with the farm overrun, Shane dead by Rick's hand, and the group scattered and terrified. The ratings had grown by 32% over the first season, averaging 6.91 million same-day viewers. The audience had more than doubled from where it started. Season 3 is where the show became a cultural force. Mazzara's first full season as showrunner introduced two elements that would define the series for years. The first was the prison, which gave the show a permanent home base and a visual metaphor for what these survivors were building. A civilization, behind walls, a place worth defending. The second was the governor, played by David Morrissey, with a quiet menace that made him the show's first truly memorable human antagonist. The governor ran a community called Woodbury that looked from the outside like a functioning small town. Clean streets, friendly neighbours, a sense of normalcy. Inside, the governor was a man holding together his own sanity with violence and control, keeping his zombified daughter chained in a closet and smiling through the horror of it all. Season 3 also introduced Michonne, played by Danai Gurira, who arrived carrying a katana and leading two jawless, armless walkers on chains. She barely spoke for her first several episodes. She did not need to. Everything the audience needed to know about her was communicated through how she moved, how she watched, how she survived. Michonne would become one of the most iconic characters in the show's history, and her introduction is a masterclass in how to bring a new character into an established ensemble without a single word of exposition. The ratings for Season 3 were staggering. The show averaged 10.75 million same-day viewers, a 56% increase over the previous year. And here is the number that matters most. Beginning in its third season, The Walking Dead became the first cable series in television history to have the highest total viewership among adults 18 to 49 across all of television. Not just cable, all of television, including broadcast networks. An AMC zombie show was beating everything. It was beating the sitcoms on CBS. It was beating the dramas on NBC. It was beating the reality shows on Fox. Nothing like that had ever happened for a cable scripted series, and it happened because the show was doing something that nobody else was doing at the same scale. After Season 3, Mazzara departed. The press release from AMC read that both parties acknowledged there was a difference of opinion about where the show should go moving forward and concluded that it was best to part ways. That diplomatic language concealed what was by now becoming a pattern. 3 seasons in, and the show was on its third showrunner. No other prestige drama of this era experienced that kind of creative leadership instability. Scott Gimple, who had been a writer and producer on the show since Season 2, took over as showrunner beginning with Season 4. And here is where the golden age reached its absolute peak. Gimple's first season was, by most critical assessments, the strongest the show had produced. The Flute arc that tore through the prison in the first half of the season created a kind of horror that the show had not previously attempted. The horror of watching people you love die from something you cannot fight with a gun or a knife. Herschel's quiet heroism during the epidemic, moving from cell to cell, treating the sick, while the rest of the group fortified the fences, was some of the finest character work the show ever did. And then came Too Far Gone, the Season 4 mid-season finale, which is the episode that many fans and critics point to as the single best episode The Walking Dead ever produced. The governor returned with a new army. He captured Michonne and Herschel. He stood outside the prison gates and demanded Rick's surrender. And when Rick tried to negotiate, when Rick tried to find the peaceful solution, the governor took Michonne's katana and drove it into Herschel's neck. The prison fell. The group scattered. The governor died. And the show delivered a sequence of action, horror, and genuine emotional devastation that was as good as anything on television that year, cable or broadcast. Season 4 averaged 13.33 million same-day viewers, a 24% increase. Then came Season 5, and Season 5 was the mountaintop. The premiere, No Sanctuary, aired on October 12, 2014, and drew 17.29 million viewers. It was a record that no cable series has matched since. The episode resolved the Terminus cliffhanger, with Carol single-handedly assaulting the compound, firing a bottle rocket into a propane tank and creating enough chaos for Rick and the others to fight their way out. Carol's evolution from an abused wife hiding behind her husband in Season 1 to the most dangerous and capable member of the group by Season 5 was one of the great long-form character arcs in television, and Melissa McBride played it with a subtlety that the Emmy voters never properly recognised. Season 5 took the group to Alexandria, a walled community in Virginia that had survived the apocalypse largely intact. The tension of that arrival, Rick's group showing up at the gates, looking like wild animals, and slowly trying to remember what civilization felt like, was the show at its most thematically rich. These were people who had survived by becoming something almost unrecognisable, and now they were being asked to become human again. That is a genuinely interesting dramatic question, and the show spent an entire season exploring it. The show averaged 14.38 million same-day viewers for Season 5, an 8% improvement over the previous year. And beginning midway through Season 3, the series had entered an unprecedented run of 75 consecutive episodes with more than 10 million same-day viewers. 75 episodes, that is 2 more than the entire run of Game of Thrones. What made the Golden Age work beneath all the numbers and the records and the cultural domination was something simpler than any of that. The show felt like it mattered. When Glenn risked his life, it felt like a real risk. When Rick made a decision, the consequences were real and lasting. When a character died, they stayed dead, and the weight of their absence changed the people who survived them. The show had taught its audience to care, and the audience had responded by showing up in numbers that nobody in the television industry had ever seen for a cable-scripted series. That is what was at stake when the show made the decisions it was about to make. Not just ratings, not just revenue, but the trust of an audience that had been trained to believe that this show would respect their investment. An audience that had been told, through 5 seasons of honest storytelling, that when The Walking Dead asked you to feel something, it was because the feeling was earned. That trust was about to be broken, and the first crack appeared not in a bad episode, but in a trick. A cheap, cynical trick involving a dumpster, a beloved character, and the growing suspicion that the people making this show had stopped caring about the story and started caring about something else entirely. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Season 6 of The Walking Dead premiered in October of 2015, and the ratings were still enormous. The season would average 13.15 million same-day viewers, down slightly from the peak but still more than enough to make it the most watched scripted show on cable by a wide margin. By any reasonable measure, the show was still a juggernaut. But Season 6 is where something shifted in the relationship between the show and its audience. And once it shifted, it never fully shifted back. The first sign came in the 3rd episode of the season, an episode called Thank You. In that episode, Glenn Rhee, played by Stephen Yeun, one of the original cast members who'd been with the show since the very first season, found himself trapped on top of a dumpster, surrounded by walkers. His companion, a man named Nicholas, who had been spiraling with guilt and panic, put a gun to his own head and shot himself. Nicholas's body fell off the dumpster and took Glenn with him, and the camera showed what appeared to be Glenn being torn apart by walkers, his screams filling the soundtrack as intestines were ripped from a body on the ground. The episode ended. Glenn appeared to be dead. For 3 weeks the show did not address what had happened. Glenn simply did not appear. The audience went through the 5 stages of grief in real time. Fan forums exploded. Think pieces were written. People genuinely mourned a fictional character they had spent 5 years watching grow from a scared kid delivering pizzas in Atlanta to one of the most capable and decent human beings in the apocalypse. Then the show revealed that Glenn was alive. He had not been torn apart. Nicholas's body had fallen on top of him, and the walkers had been eating Nicholas while Glenn crawled underneath the dumpster and survived. He was fine. He had been fine the whole time. The relief that some viewers felt was immediately overwhelmed by something else, a feeling that is hard to name precisely, but easy to recognize, the feeling of having been played. The show had not told a story about Glenn dying. It had manufactured an illusion of Glenn dying specifically to generate 3 weeks of social media conversation, think pieces, trending hashtags, and the kind of audience anxiety that translates directly into tune-in ratings for the episode that reveals the truth. The death had been a trick, and the resurrection was not a story beat. It was the punchline to a trick. This matters more than it might seem like it should, because The Walking Dead had built its entire identity on the idea that death was real in this world. From the very first season, the show's central promise to its audience had been that no one was safe. That promise was what gave every dangerous scene its tension. When Rick walked into a room full of walkers, the audience held their breath because they genuinely believed the show might kill Rick. When Daryl went on a solo mission, the audience worried because they genuinely believed the show might not bring him back. That belief, that faith in the show's willingness to follow through on its own rules, was the foundation of everything. The dumpster fake-out cracked that foundation. It told the audience, in terms they could not misunderstand, that the show was now willing to use the appearance of death as a marketing tool. Not as a storytelling device, a marketing tool. The death itself was a lie. The grief was manufactured. The emotional investment the audience had made was not being honoured. It was being exploited for engagement metrics. Some fans defended the decision. They argued that the misdirect was clever, that the relief of Glenn's survival was worth the pain of believing he was dead. Those arguments are not unreasonable, but they miss the larger point, which is that a show built on the credibility of its consequences had just demonstrated that its consequences could not be trusted. And once you teach an audience not to trust you, every subsequent moment of tension carries less weight. Because somewhere in the back of the viewer's mind, a small voice is now saying, "This might not be real." That was the first crack. The second one was worse. The Season 6 finale, an episode called Last Day on Earth, aired on April 3rd, 2016, and introduced the character that the show had been building toward for months. Negan, played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan, the leader of a group called the Saviors. The comics readers knew what was coming. In Robert Kirkman's source material, Negan's introduction is one of the most shocking and brutal moments in the entire run. He lines up Rick's group, forces them to their knees, and beats Glenn to death with a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire named Lucille. It is horrifying, and it is unforgettable, and it works because the comic commits to it completely and makes the reader sit with the consequences for issues afterward. The television show chose to do something different. The finale spent its entire runtime building toward Negan's arrival. Rick's group was intercepted, redirected, trapped, and finally forced to their knees in a clearing in the woods. Negan delivered a monologue. He played Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo. He swung the bat. The camera showed the point of view of the victim as the blows rained down. And then the screen went black. The episode ended. The audience was not told who died. They would have to wait until the Season 7 premiere nearly 7 months later in October to find out. The reaction was furious. Not frustrated, not disappointed, furious. The show had taken the most anticipated moment in its history, the moment that the comic book readers had been promising television. Only viewers would be the most devastating thing they had ever seen, and turned it into a cliffhanger, a literal cliffhanger, the cheapest trick in television, deployed at the exact moment when honesty and commitment would have been the most effective storytelling choices available. IMDb data shows that Last Day on Earth has the lowest user rating of any season finale in the show's history. Critics were scathing. The consensus was not that the episode was poorly made, because the technical craft was fine. The consensus was that the decision to withhold the death was a betrayal. The show had chosen rating strategy over storytelling. It had chosen the artificial inflation of its Season 7 premiere over the honest delivery of a narrative climax that the audience had earned through years of investment. Showrunner Scott Gimple defended the decision in interviews. He described it as a story choice, arguing that the finale was about the end of Rick's journey, feeling invincible, and that the Season 7 premiere would be about dealing with the aftermath. The argument had a kind of structural logic to it if you squinted, but it collapsed under the weight of a simpler truth. The audience knew why the show had done it. They knew it was not about structure or storytelling rhythm. It was about making sure people tuned in nearly 7 months later to find out who died. Between the dumpster fake-out and the Negan cliffhanger, Season 6 taught the audience something that the Golden Age had never taught them. It taught them to be suspicious. It taught them that the show was now thinking about their attention as a resource to be managed rather than a gift to be earned. It taught them that the emotional responses they brought to this show, the grief, the tension, the fear for characters they loved, were being calculated, measured, and optimized by people whose primary concern was no longer the story. The show that had spent 5 seasons building trust had spent 1 season burning through it. And the fire was only getting started because when Season 7 finally premiered on October 23rd, 2016, and the audience learned who Negan had killed, what they saw would push millions of viewers away from the show permanently. Not because it was too violent, although it was extraordinarily violent, but because the violence felt different now. It felt like it was being done to the audience, not to the characters. That difference, the difference between violence that serves a story and violence that punishes a viewer, is where the real decline of The Walking Dead begins. The Season 7 premiere of The Walking Dead, an episode called The Day Will Come When You Won't Be, aired on October 23rd, 2016, and finally answered the question the Season 6 finale had refused to answer. Negan had killed Abraham Ford first. Then when Daryl punched Negan in retaliation, Negan turned and killed Glenn Rhee as punishment. 17.03 million people watched that episode. It was the show's second highest rated episode ever, behind only the Season 5 premiere. The 7-month wait had worked exactly as planned. The audience had come back in enormous numbers to find out who died. AMC had gotten its premiere bump. The strategy had succeeded. And then the audience started leaving. Not gradually, the way viewership naturally erodes over a long-running series, sharply, immediately. In numbers that nobody at AMC had anticipated and that nobody in the television industry had seen before, from a show at this level of cultural dominance. The episode itself was brutal in a way that divided the audience cleanly in two. Abraham's death was violent, but expected. The character had been marked for death in the comics, and Michael Cudlitz played the final moment with a grim defiance that felt true to who Abraham was. But Glenn's death was something else. The show lingered on it. Negan drove Lucille into Glenn's skull, and Glenn, his eye bulging from the socket, looked up at his pregnant wife Maggie and tried to speak her name. The camera held on his ruined face. The blows continued. The show committed to showing every second of it in graphic, unflinching detail. There is an argument that this level of violence was necessary, that Negan's introduction required the audience to understand exactly what kind of threat he represented, and that pulling away from the violence would have been a kind of dishonesty. That argument is not entirely wrong. The problem was not the violence itself. The problem was the context surrounding it. After nearly 7 months of being denied the answer, nearly 7 months of being held hostage by a cliffhanger, the audience was already primed to feel manipulated. And when the answer finally came, it was delivered with a level of graphic intensity that felt less like storytelling and more like punishment. The show was not just killing Glenn, it was making the audience watch every moment of Glenn's death as payoff for a marketing strategy. The violence and the cliffhanger were connected, and together they created the feeling that the show was wielding its audience's emotional investment as a weapon against them. Critics noticed it immediately. Matt Zoller-Seitz, one of the most respected television critics working at the time, wrote that the longer the series went on, the more obvious it became that the violence was the point, and everything else was an intellectual fig leaf. That is a devastating assessment of a show that had once used violence with genuine purpose and real emotional consequence. The ratings tell the rest of the story with mathematical precision. After that, a 17 million viewer premiere, the audience cratered. Season 7 averaged 11.35 million viewers for the full run, a significant drop from Season 6's 13.15 million average. But the real damage was in the trajectory. Each week more people left. The mid-season premiere dropped. The back half of the season dropped further. People were not skipping episodes and coming back. They were leaving and not returning. The creative problems with the Negan era went far beyond the premiere. The fundamental issue was structural. The Savior storyline, which in the comics was a focused and propulsive narrative, was stretched across 2 full seasons of television. Season 7 was largely dedicated to establishing Negan's dominance and Rick's subjugation. Season 8, subtitled All Out War, was dedicated to the fight back. Together, that was 32 episodes built around a single conflict, and the show did not have enough story to fill them. The result was filler, episode after episode, where characters stood in rooms and talked about what they were going to do, or had just done, or were thinking about doing. Entire episodes dedicated to minor communities that the audience had no investment in, plotlines that went nowhere, character moments that repeated themselves week after week without any forward movement. Jeffrey Dean Morgan, to his enormous credit, committed fully to the role of Negan, but even Morgan acknowledged years later that the character had been written with a frustrating lack of depth for far too long. At Walker Stalker Con in Atlanta, Morgan said that he felt Negan was very one-dimensional during the Savior's reign. He said that he thought everything he said coming out of the RV in the Season 6 finale was sort of what he said for the next 2 years, and it never shifted. That is the actor who played the character telling you directly that the writing gave him nothing to develop across 32 episodes of television. Rotten Tomatoes tells the same story through a different lens. Season 7 received a 66% approval rating from critics, the second lowest in the show's history at that point. Season 8 dropped further to 64%, the absolute lowest. For a show that had been in the 80s and 90s for most of its run, those numbers represented a critical consensus that the show had lost its way. The irony of the Negan era is that Negan as a character eventually became one of the most compelling figures in the entire franchise. His rehabilitation arc in later seasons, particularly his relationship with Judith Grimes and his complicated dynamic with Maggie, was some of the strongest character work the show produced in its final years. Morgan himself said that Season 10 was the best stuff he'd gotten to do on the show, but by the time the show figured out how to use Negan properly, the audience that should have been watching had already gone. There is a painful lesson embedded in what happened during Seasons 7 and 8. The show had one of the most iconic villains in comic book history, played by one of the most charismatic actors working in television, and it wasted him. It wasted him by stretching his introduction across 2 seasons of filler and repetition. It wasted him by refusing to develop his character beyond his most surface-level traits for years. And it wasted him by introducing him through a cliffhanger and a death scene that had already exhausted the audience's goodwill before the character had a chance to become what he was capable of becoming. The numbers from this era are worth sitting with because they tell a story that cannot be argued with. From the Season 7 premiere to Season 9, the show's average same-day ratings dropped by 60% among adults 18 to 49 and by 53% in total viewers, according to analysis by The Hollywood Reporter. The Hollywood Reporter compared that decline to other long-running shows over the same period, including Grey's Anatomy, NCIS, Law and Order, SVU, The Big Bang Theory, Modern Family, and American Idol. On average, those other shows fell by 22% in the 18 to 49 demographic over the same time frame. The worst decline of any comparable show was Modern Family, which fell by 38.5%. The Walking Dead's 60% decline was in a category by itself. There is a comparison that helps put this in perspective. The Walking Dead's run of 75 consecutive episodes with more than 10 million same-day viewers, which stretched from midway through Season 3 to the beginning of Season 7, was longer than the entire run of Game of Thrones. The show that inherited The Walking Dead's position as the most discussed and most watched drama in American popular culture lasted, in total episodes, a shorter span than the streak The Walking Dead burned through and threw away. That is what the Negan era cost the show. Not just viewers, not just critical acclaim, but the cultural position it had spent 5 years building. The Walking Dead went into Season 6 as the biggest scripted show in American television. It came out of Season 8 as a show people used to watch. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What happened next made everything worse, because if the Negan cliffhanger was the moment the show broke its audience's trust, and if Seasons 7 and 8 were the period when the show bled out its cultural relevance, the decision to kill Carl Grimes was the moment the show destroyed its own future. And the story behind that decision is one of the most baffling chapters in the entire history of The Walking Dead. Carl Grimes had been on The Walking Dead since the very first episode. Chandler Riggs was 11 years old when the show premiered in 2010. He grew up on camera in a way that very few actors ever have, transforming from a small child hiding behind his mother in the woods outside Atlanta into a hardened, capable young survivor who represented something that the show desperately needed: a future. Carl was the character who was supposed to inherit this world. In Robert Kirkman's comic book series, Carl survives the entire run. He is alive in the final issue, published in 2019, living as an adult in a rebuilt civilization, married with a daughter, carrying his father's legacy forward. Carl was the endgame. He was the point of the whole story. The television show killed him in the 8th season. The mid-season finale of Season 8, an episode called How It's Gotta Be, aired on December 10th, 2017. In the episode, Carl reveals to Rick that he has been bitten by a walker. The bite happened during a sequence in an earlier episode that most viewers did not even register as significant at the time. Carl was helping a stranger named Siddiq in the woods, and during a scuffle with walkers, he was bitten on the abdomen. It was an ordinary death in a show that had always treated ordinary deaths as the most devastating kind. No grand sacrifice, no heroic last stand, just a bite in the woods while doing something decent for another person. Carl's actual death came in the Season 8 mid-season premiere, which aired on February 25th, 2018. He said goodbye to Rick and Michonne in the sewers beneath Alexandria. He gave Rick a letter. He talked about his dream of a peaceful future where even Negan could be redeemed. And then he shot himself in the head to prevent reanimation, while Rick and Michonne sat on the other side of a wall and listened. The decision to kill Carl was made by showrunner Scott Gimple, and the reasoning he gave publicly was that Carl's death was the narrative mechanism needed to explain why Rick would spare Negan's life at the end of the all-out war arc. In the comics, Rick's decision to let Negan live is a gradual evolution driven by Carl's influence over many issues. The show compressed that evolution into a single dramatic gesture. Carl's dying wish for peace was supposed to be the reason Rick, who had spent 2 seasons promising to kill Negan, instead slashed his throat and then ordered the wound to be treated. Carl died so that Negan could live. The backlash was immediate and intense, but what made it different from the reaction to other controversial Walking Dead deaths was the source. This was not just fans being upset that a character they liked was gone. This was the audience recognizing that a fundamental creative mistake had been made. Killing Carl did not just remove a character from the show, it removed the show's reason for existing. Think about what The Walking Dead had been building toward for 8 seasons. Rick Grimes was a man trying to keep his children alive in an impossible world. That was his motivation from the first scene of the first episode, when he woke up in that hospital and his first thought was finding his wife and son. Everything Rick did, every decision, every alliance, every act of violence was in service of keeping Carl and later Judith safe. Carl was not just Rick's son in the narrative, he was Rick's purpose. Without Carl, the question of what Rick was fighting for lost its most specific and most powerful answer. Chandler Riggs' father, William Riggs, posted on Facebook shortly after the death was announced, and his words landed like a detonation in the fan community. He wrote about watching Gimple fire his son 2 weeks before his 18th birthday, after telling him they wanted him for the next 3 years. The implication was clear. The decision to kill Carl was not something Riggs had asked for or anticipated. It was a creative choice made above his head that ended his involvement in the show he'd spent his entire adolescence working on. Gimple responded by insisting it was purely a story decision. He said this was a story turn, that is it, and that the show did not receive a request from any actor. He described the difficulty of losing someone the team had worked with for as long as they had worked with Riggs. But the damage was done, both to the audience's faith in the show and to something much more important. Something that would not become fully clear until a few months later. In the spring and summer of 2018, reports began emerging that Andrew Lincoln was leaving The Walking Dead. The news was eventually confirmed at San Diego Comic-Con in July of 2018, where Lincoln announced his departure from the show he had led since its first scene. Lincoln had 2 young children who lived with his family in England. The show filmed in Atlanta for 8 months out of every year. He had been making that commute for 8 years. The official reason for his departure was his desire to spend more time with his family, and nobody who heard it doubted it was true. But the connection to Carl's death was impossible to ignore. Fellow cast member Tom Payne, who played Jesus on the show, said directly in an interview that he believed Carl's death had been a moment of pause for Lincoln. He said he thought when Carl died and Chandler left, that was a moment for Lincoln of asking where does this leave Rick and how does he move forward. Lincoln himself drew the line even more explicitly. In an interview before his departure was confirmed, he said that when the news came that Carl was dying on the show, it felt to him very much like a bookend. Not the end of a chapter, but a book. He said that searching for his wife and his son had been the 2 engines that kept Rick alive at the beginning of the show 8 years ago, and to lose the second engine that fueled him at that point certainly felt like the end. That is the lead actor of the show telling you in the most direct terms he could manage, while still being diplomatic about his colleagues, that killing Carl had removed the narrative reason for Rick to continue. And once the narrative reason was gone, the personal reason to keep spending 8 months a year away from his children in another country was gone too. Andrew Lincoln's final episode as a series regular, titled What Comes After, aired on November 4th, 2018 as the 5th episode of Season 9. In the episode, Rick leads a herd of walkers toward a bridge and detonates it, apparently sacrificing himself to save the communities. But Rick survives, badly wounded, and is picked up by a helicopter operated by a mysterious group that would later be revealed as the Civic Republic Military. Rick Grimes did not die, he disappeared, and the show continued without him. The domino effect of these 2 decisions, Carl's death and Rick's departure, was catastrophic. Within the span of 12 episodes, The Walking Dead had lost both the character, who represented its future, and the character, who was its present. Lauren Cohan, who played Maggie, also reduced her involvement significantly in Season 9 due to contract disputes with AMC, leaving the show for most of the season to star in a new ABC drama called Whiskey Cavalier. The core cast that had carried the show through its golden age was disintegrating. And here is the part that makes the whole thing almost unbearable to think about. If Carl had been alive when Lincoln decided to leave, the show had a natural successor. Carl was being positioned as a leader. He had the relationships, the history, the audience investment. The show could have transitioned from Rick's story to Carl's story in a way that felt organic and earned. Kirkman's comic had been building toward exactly that transition for years. The television show had destroyed its own succession plan, and it had done so for the most reductive possible reason: to explain, in a single dramatic gesture, why Rick would spare a villain's life. Gimple was promoted in January of 2018 to Chief Content Officer of the entire Walking Dead franchise. The man who had presided over the show's steepest ratings decline, who had approved the Negan cliffhanger, who had killed Carl Grimes and set in motion the departure of Andrew Lincoln, was given more power over the franchise, not less. Angela Kang, a writer who had been with the show since Season 2, was promoted to showrunner, beginning with Season 9. It was the right move, and it came too late to save what had already been lost. There is a story that runs underneath everything we have talked about so far, a story that the audience at home could feel in the quality of what they were watching but could not see directly, because it was happening in conference rooms and courtrooms and lawyers' offices rather than on screen. It is the story of AMC's relationship with its own most valuable property, and it is one of the most damaging corporate mismanagement stories in modern television. To understand what AMC did to The Walking Dead, you have to understand something about how the show was structured financially, because that structure is different from how most television shows work, and that difference is the root of almost every behind-the-scenes problem the show experienced. When AMC produced Mad Men and Breaking Bad, the two shows that had established the network as a destination for prestige television, those shows were licensed from outside studios. AMC paid a license fee to the studio that made the show, and the studio handled production. This is the standard model in television. The network and the studio are separate entities with separate financial interests, and the separation creates a kind of natural check on the worst impulses of both sides. AMC did something different with The Walking Dead. The network produced the show through its own in-house studio. AMC was both the buyer and the seller. It set its own internal license fee, which means it determined for itself how much of the show's revenue would be counted as production cost versus profit. This is, to put it plainly, a structure that allows the network to manipulate the numbers in ways that an outside studio would never accept. Frank Darabont experienced this directly and immediately. Under deposition in his eventual lawsuit, Darabont described what he called crisis-level problems during the second season's production. AMC had cut the per-episode budget from $3.4 million to $3 million, while simultaneously increasing the episode order from 6 to 13. And the network kept the Georgia film tax credit for itself, which further reduced the money actually available for production by roughly 25%. The math was simple and brutal. The show was expected to produce more than twice as many episodes, with significantly less money per episode, and the difference was going straight to AMC's bottom line. This was not a network investing in its flagship show. This was a network harvesting it. Darabont's lawsuit, filed in December 2013, eventually settled in July 2021 for $200 million. $200 million. That number is not just large. It is an implicit acknowledgement that AMC's financial practices with the show had been problematic enough to justify that kind of payout to avoid a jury trial. But Darabont was not the only one who felt cheated. In 2017, Robert Kirkman, the man who created the comic book the show was based on, along with executive producers Gail Ann Hurd, David Alpert, Glenn Massara, and Charles Eagley, filed their own lawsuit against AMC over profit participation. The core of their argument was about something called modified adjusted gross receipts, which is the formula a network uses to calculate how much profit is shared with the creative talent. The producers alleged that AMC had structured the MAGR definition in a way that, in its original form, would not have paid out a single dollar in profit participation. Not a reduced amount, zero. That lawsuit went through years of legal proceedings. In 2020, a Los Angeles judge ruled in AMC's favor on all 7 issues the producers raised, finding that the contracts were standard and that AMC had compensated them properly. But the producers appealed, and in November 2022, literally the week before the series finale aired, they filed a second, separate lawsuit for $200 million. This time arguing that their contracts entitled them to the same treatment that Darabont had received in his settlement. In March of 2024, a federal judge denied AMC's motion to throw out that lawsuit, allowing it to proceed. As of 2026, various aspects of these legal battles remain in some form of litigation or confidential arbitration. The creative talent behind one of the most profitable shows in cable television history has been fighting in court for years over whether the network that aired their work actually paid them what they were owed. The financial dimension of this story matters because it was not separate from the creative decline. Every budget decision AMC made had a direct impact on what appeared on screen. Less money per episode meant fewer location shoots, which is why the show increasingly relied on bottle episodes where characters stood in rooms and talked. Less money meant fewer elaborate walker sequences, which is why the later seasons often felt like the zombies had become an afterthought in their own show. Less money meant less time in the editing room, less time in post-production, less time to get the technical aspects right. But the corporate damage went beyond just the budget. It extended to the revolving door of showrunners, which was itself a product of the network's approach to creative control. 4 showrunners in 11 seasons is extraordinary for any drama, but it is especially damaging for a show like The Walking Dead, which depended on long-term character development and narrative consistency. Frank Darabont established the show's visual language and emotional tone. He was fired midway through season 2. Glenn Mazzara took over and built the show into a ratings powerhouse across seasons 2 and 3. He departed after season 3 due to what AMC diplomatically called a difference of opinion about where the show should go. Scott Gimple assumed control for season 4 and ran the show through season 8, presiding over both the peak of the show's ratings and the steepest decline in its history. Angela Kang took over for season 9 and ran the show through its conclusion in season 11. Each transition meant a new creative vision, new priorities, new ideas about who these characters were and what the show was about. Mazzara's Walking Dead was a propulsive survival thriller. Gimple's Walking Dead at its best was a character drama that used the apocalypse as a lens for examining moral questions about leadership and community. At its worst, Gimple's Walking Dead was a show that prioritized shock value and cliffhangers over narrative integrity. Kang's Walking Dead was a more grounded, character-focused show that critics responded to warmly, but that the audience had largely already abandoned. No other prestige drama of this era experienced anything like this level of instability. Breaking Bad had 1 showrunner for its entire run. Game of Thrones had 2 showrunners for its entire run. Better Call Saul had 1 creative team from start to finish. The Sopranos, The Wire, Mad Men, 1 vision, start to finish. The Walking Dead had 4 visions in 11 seasons, and the transitions between them were never smooth, because each departure carried with it the implication that the previous showrunner and the network could not agree on what the show should be. Think about what that means for the audience. Think about watching a show for 11 years and having the creative voice behind it change 4 times. It is like reading a novel where the author is replaced every 100 pages. The characters have the same names, the same faces, the same addresses. But the person deciding what they do, what they care about, how they speak, and why anything happens to them keeps changing. And each new author has their own interpretation of who these people are. The Walking Dead's character inconsistencies, the tonal shifts that fans complained about for years, the feeling that the show did not know what it wanted to be from season to season, were not the result of bad writing in any simple sense. They were the result of a production structure that churned through creative leaders the way the show churned through minor characters. Someone was always being replaced, and the replacements always brought a different understanding of what the show was for. AMC made billions of dollars from The Walking Dead. The show generated enormous revenue through advertising, syndication, licensing, and the various financial instruments available to a network that produces its own content. The franchise spawned 6 spin-off series. It generated merchandise, video games, theme park attractions, and an entire expanded universe of branded content. And the people who created it spent years in courtrooms arguing about whether they had been paid fairly for their work. That is the corporate story of The Walking Dead, a network that recognized it, had something extraordinary, and whose response was not to nurture that thing, but to extract from it, until the extraction itself became more visible than the thing being extracted from. The audience did not know the specific numbers, did not read the legal filings, did not understand the MAGR definitions, but they could feel it. They could feel it in the episodes that looked cheaper than they used to. They could feel it in the filler that padded out seasons to meet episode counts. They could feel it in the sense, growing stronger with each passing year, that the show was being kept alive, not because anyone had a story left to tell, but because the machine required feeding. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Angela Kang was not an outsider. She was not someone parachuted in from another show or another network to fix a problem she did not understand. Kang had been a writer on The Walking Dead since the 2nd season. She had been on staff when Darabont was fired. She had written under Mazzara. She had served as a co-executive producer under Gimple. She had written more than 20 episodes of the show, including some of its most significant hours. The Season 2 episode, Judge, Jury, Executioner, in which Dale died and the seeds of what fans would later call the Rick-tatorship were planted, was hers. The Season 4 episode, still the Daryl and Beth standalone that became a fan favourite, was hers. The Season 4 finale, which she co-wrote with Gimple, comes in second on most lists of the best finales in the show's history. When she took over as showrunner in January 2018, Kang knew exactly what she was inheriting. She knew the audience had hemorrhaged, she knew Rick was leaving, she knew Carl was dead, she knew that the critical consensus had turned against the show, and that the cultural conversation had moved on. And she knew that the window for earning any of it back was narrow and closing. What Kang did with Season 9, under those circumstances, was remarkable. She understood that the show needed to feel fundamentally different from what the Gimple era had become, while still being recognisably The Walking Dead. Her first move was structural. After resolving the Negan conflict in the first few episodes, tying off the storylines that Gimple had left for her, she jumped the show forward 6 years in the timeline. Everything changed. The communities had rebuilt. Infrastructure existed again. Agriculture, trade, basic governance. The survivors were no longer just surviving. They were building something. And the question of how to build a functioning society from the ashes of the old one was genuinely more interesting than the question of which group of bad guys the heroes would fight next. The time jump also solved, or at least addressed, the Andrew Lincoln problem. Rick's disappearance happened in the 5th episode of the season, an episode called What Comes After that served as Lincoln's farewell. The show treated it with appropriate weight. Rick hallucinated conversations with people he had lost, including Herschel and Sasha. He led a herd of walkers to a bridge and detonated it. He was swept downriver and picked up by a helicopter. It was emotional, well-crafted, and respectful of what Lincoln had given the show over 9 years. And then, after the explosion, the show jumped forward another 6 years. And when the audience came back, the world was different enough that Rick's absence could be felt without the show collapsing under the weight of it. Kang introduced the Whisperers, a group of survivors who wore the skins of the dead and walked among the herds, led by a woman called Alpha and her enforcer Beta. The Whisperers were genuinely unsettling in a way that the show's antagonists had not been in years. They represented something the show had not explored since The Governor. Not just a different group with different rules, but a fundamentally different philosophy about what survival meant. Alpha believed that the dead had already won, that civilization was a lie, and that the only honest response to the apocalypse was to abandon everything human and become part of the herd. That is a philosophically interesting villain, and the show engaged with her ideas seriously, rather than simply presenting her as an obstacle to be defeated. The Negan rehabilitation arc, which had been nearly impossible to imagine during the brutality of seasons 7 and 8, began to work under Kang's direction. Negan's interactions with Judith Grimes, Rick's daughter, gave Jeffrey Dean Morgan the material he had been asking for since he joined the show. The relationship between the imprisoned Negan and the child who visited him through the cell bars, who challenged him, who demanded he be better, was one of the most genuinely surprising creative choices the show made in its final years. Morgan was not wrong when he said Season 10 was the best stuff he had gotten to do on the show. It was. Rotten Tomatoes reflected the improvement immediately. Season 9 received an 89% approval rating from critics, the highest since Season 4. Critics noted the improved pacing, the stronger character work, the willingness to take creative risks that felt motivated by story rather than by shock value. The consensus was clear. Angela Kang had made the show good again. But the viewers did not come back. Season 9 averaged roughly 5.35 million same-day viewers. That was a 37% decline from the already diminished Season 8. The people who had left during the Negan era, the millions who had turned off the show sometime between the cliffhanger and the filler and Carl's death and Rick's departure, did not return just because the critics said the show had improved. They had moved on. They were watching other things. The cultural conversation had shifted to Game of Thrones and Stranger Things, and eventually to the streaming era's endless buffet of content. The Walking Dead was no longer the show everyone was talking about. It was the show that people used to talk about, and the difference between those two things is almost impossible to bridge. This is one of the cruelest dynamics in television. Quality can recover. Trust can be partially rebuilt. A new showrunner can bring new energy and new ideas and genuinely make a show better than it has been in years. But the audience, once lost, almost never comes back. The act of leaving a show is a decision that most viewers make once. They do not check in again later to see if things have improved. They do not read the reviews and give it another chance. They simply move on to the next thing, and the show that lost them becomes something they used to watch, filed away in the same mental category as other things they used to do. Season 10 was further complicated by the pandemic. The season's finale was delayed due to COVID-19 production shutdowns, and the rhythm of the show's release schedule was disrupted in ways that made it harder for whatever remaining audience existed to stay engaged. When Season 10 returned with additional episodes in 2021, the viewership continued to decline. The final season, Season 11, was split into 3 8-episode batches that aired over approximately 15 months. The drawn-out release schedule, which was partly a creative choice and partly a response to production realities, meant that the show's ending felt less like a climactic conclusion and more like a slow fade. The final season only topped 2 million same-day viewers once for the August 2021 premiere. Individual episodes dipped below 1.5 million. The show that had once commanded 17 million viewers was finishing its run in front of an audience smaller than most local news broadcasts. The series finale itself was a mixed affair. It attempted to wrap up storylines for Daryl, Carol, Maggie, Negan, and the various communities that had been built over 11 seasons, while simultaneously setting up multiple spin-off series. The ending was not bad exactly, but it was crowded. It was trying to be both a conclusion and a series of beginnings, and the competing demands left it feeling like neither. The final scene showed Judith and RJ looking out over the Commonwealth, with Judith telling her little brother that they get to start over, that they are the ones who live. Separately, in a scene that would lead directly into the spin-off, Rick was shown writing a letter by a river, still separated from his family, still a prisoner of the CRM. Michonne was shown riding through fog on horseback. The final montage played moments from the entire run of the series, characters who had lived and died, while voices repeated the phrase that had become the franchise's thesis statement: "We are the ones who live." It was an ending that tried to honour what the show had been, while acknowledging that the story was not really over, that AMC had plans for these characters and this world that extended well beyond the finale. Whether that made the ending feel hopeful or hollow depended entirely on how you felt about what the show had become and what it was about to become next. Kang had done something genuinely impressive. She had taken a show that was critically derided and creatively exhausted and made it good again. She had given Negan depth. She had created compelling new antagonists. She had handled Rick's departure with grace. She had found new stories worth telling in a world that many people had assumed was played out. But the window for those stories to reach the audience they deserved had closed years earlier, slammed shut by the decisions of the Gimple era and the corporate machinery of AMC. That is the tragedy of Angela Kang's tenure. She was the right person, making the right creative choices, arriving 2 years too late for those choices to save what had already been lost. The Walking Dead ended on November 20th, 2022. The franchise did not, and the strategy AMC chose for extending the franchise beyond the flagship series tells you everything about what the show had become in the minds of the people who owned it. They did not end the story, they scattered it. Instead of a single definitive conclusion, AMC broke the remaining characters into separate shows, each one following a different subset of the original cast into a different part of the world. Maggie and Negan went to Manhattan. Daryl went to France. Rick and Michonne went to Philadelphia, or rather, to the civic republic that occupied what had been Philadelphia. Each spin-off would carry a piece of the original show's audience with it, and together, the spin-offs would justify AMC's continued investment in the Walking Dead brand. The first spin-off in the extended universe was actually Fear the Walking Dead, which had premiered back in 2015 and ran for 8 seasons before ending in 2023. Fear had its own creative turbulence, including its own showrunner changes, and a divisive reboot in Season 4 that alienated much of its original audience. Then came The Walking Dead, World Beyond, a 2-season limited series that ran in 2020 and 2021 and focused on younger characters in the Civic Republic. World Beyond was poorly received and served primarily as a bridge to the Rick and Michonne story. Tales of the Walking Dead, an anthology series, aired a single season in 2022 and was not renewed. It had been positioned as a way to tell standalone stories set in the Walking Dead universe, but the audience response was indifferent. The 3 spin-offs that AMC pinned its real hopes on were Dead City, Daryl Dixon, and The Ones Who Live. Each one took a different approach to continuing the franchise, and each one illustrated a different aspect of what The Walking Dead had become in its post-flagship phase. Dead City premiered in June of 2023 and followed Maggie and Negan to Manhattan. The premise was inherently interesting. Manhattan Island, cut off from the mainland, overrun by walkers, occupied by a warlord called the Croat, who had been one of Negan's former lieutenants. Maggie needed to find her kidnapped son Herschel. Negan was the only person who could help her navigate the Croats' territory. The tension between these 2 characters, one of whom had watched the other beat her husband to death with a baseball bat, was the engine of the show. Dead City worked in stretches. Lauren Cohan and Jeffrey Dean Morgan had a chemistry built on years of shared history, and the show was not afraid to let the ugliness between them sit uncomfortably on screen. Manhattan as a setting gave the show a visual vocabulary that was distinct from the rural Georgia and Virginia landscapes of the original series. There were walkers trapped in subway tunnels, walkers sealed inside flooded buildings, walkers pouring through the streets of Midtown. The scale was different, and the difference was refreshing. But Dead City also illustrated the fundamental limitation of the spin-off model. The show had two characters from the original series placed in a new environment with new supporting characters that the audience had no history with. The emotional weight came entirely from what the audience already knew about Maggie and Negan. Without that pre-existing investment, the new world and its new inhabitants felt thin. The show was borrowing emotional capital it had not earned on its own, spending the accumulated audience investment from the original series to prop up stories that could not yet stand independently. Daryl Dixon premiered in September of 2023 and took the franchise in the most geographically ambitious direction it had ever attempted. Daryl woke up in France, separated from everyone he knew, and became involved with the community, protecting a boy named Laurent, who was believed to be special in some way connected to the Walker apocalypse. The show eventually moved through multiple European locations across its seasons, taking Daryl from France to Spain and introducing Carol in the second season when she crossed the Atlantic to find him. Norman Reedus had been the show's biggest star since Andrew Lincoln's departure, and the spin-off gave him more room to work than the later seasons of the original series had. Daryl alone, communicating across a language barrier, navigating a world that was both familiar in its apocalyptic reality and completely foreign in its cultural setting, was a compelling premise. Reedus brought the quiet, physical performance style that had made Daryl one of the most beloved characters in the franchise, and the European locations gave the show a visual richness that the Georgia forests had long since stopped providing. But the numbers told a concerning story. When the third season of Daryl Dixon premiered in September of 2025, it drew just 241,000 live viewers. That was the lowest viewed episode in the entire history of the franchise's spin-offs. It was down significantly from the Season 2 finale, which had drawn 476,000 viewers. Even accounting for the shift to streaming on AMC+, where the episodes were available nearly a day before the linear broadcast, and even accounting for the competition from the NFL season opener and the MTV VM. As that aired the same night, the number was startling. The Walking Dead franchise, which had once commanded 17 million live viewers, was now drawing 250,000. The Ones Who Live, which premiered in February of 2024, was the exception that proved the rule. The 6-episode miniseries brought back Andrew Lincoln and Danai Gurira as Rick and Michonne, and the audience responded immediately. The premiere drew nearly 3 million viewers across its premiere night window, marking the largest premiere night audience for a new AMC series in 6 years. It set viewership and subscriber records on AMC+. The show was the #1 cable drama premiere of the entire 2023 to 2024 television season in key demographics. The Ones Who Live worked because it was, in the most fundamental sense, the show the audience had been waiting for. Rick Grimes had disappeared from the main series in Season 9. For 5 years, the audience had been told that Rick was out there somewhere, alive, and that someday the show would tell them what happened to him. The Ones Who Live delivered on that promise, and it did so with genuine emotional depth. The story of Rick's years with the CRM, his multiple escape attempts, his growing despair, his relationship with a CRM soldier named Thorn, and eventually his reunion with Michonne, was the most emotionally focused and narratively tight storytelling the franchise had produced since the Golden Age. Rick had been a consignee, essentially a prisoner with privileges, for years. He had tried to escape repeatedly. He had cut off his own hand during one attempt. He had nearly given up entirely when Michonne arrived and pulled him back. The reunion episode, in which Rick and Michonne found each other and began the complicated process of being husband and wife again after years of separation and trauma was the franchise working at its absolute best. Andrew Lincoln and Danai Gurira had always had extraordinary chemistry, and the miniseries gave them the space and the material to demonstrate it fully. The scene where Michonne gave Rick a newly engraved iPhone with a portrait of Carl, their dead son, and asked what Carl would want his father to do with this new chance, was as emotionally devastating as anything the show had ever produced. But The Ones Who Live also illuminated something uncomfortable about the franchise model. The show worked because it brought back the two characters the audience cared about most. It succeeded by returning to the original well, not by discovering new water. The audience that showed up for Rick and Michonne was the audience that had always been there for Rick and Michonne, dormant but not dead, waiting for the show to give them a reason to come back. That audience did not transfer. They did not watch Dead City because they had watched The Ones Who Live. They did not watch Daryl Dixon because they had watched Dead City. Each spin-off drew its own subset of the original audience, and each subset was smaller than the last. The franchise was not growing, it was subdividing, and each subdivision represented a further dilution of the concentrated cultural force the original show had been. This is what the reference script about Family Guy called escape velocity. The franchise is moving not because anything is pushing it forward, but because nothing has stopped it yet. AMC continues to produce Walking Dead content because the brand still has value, because the spin-offs still draw enough viewers on linear television and streaming combined to justify their existence, because the merchandise still sells, because the franchise still generates revenue across multiple platforms. But the thing that made The Walking Dead matter, the specific gravitational pull that drew 17 million people to their televisions on a Sunday night in October of 2014, is gone. What remains is a franchise, a portfolio of branded content distributed across multiple shows, each one carrying a fragment of something that was once whole. The machine is still running. The question of whether it is still producing something worth watching depends entirely on which fragment you happen to encounter. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is a detail about The Walking Dead that most people who only watch the television show do not know, and it says something important about the difference between a creator who knows when to end a story and an institution that does not. Robert Kirkman ended his Walking Dead comic book series in July of 2019. He did not announce it in advance. He did not give interviews about the decision beforehand. He did not allow the publisher to promote a final issue or organize a goodbye tour. Issue 193 of The Walking Dead simply appeared on shelves one Wednesday, and the back page read that this was the final issue. The story was over. The ending itself was a flash forward. It jumped years ahead to show an adult Carl Grimes, alive, married, with a daughter, living in a rebuilt civilization where the Walker apocalypse had become history rather than present tense. The final pages showed a statue of Rick Grimes in the town square and Carl reading from a book about his father's story. The world had been rebuilt. The dead had been defeated not through violence, but through patience and time, and the refusal to stop building. It was quiet, hopeful, and definitive. There would be no more issues. The story was told. Kirkman explained his reasoning afterward. He said he had always planned to end the series when the time felt right, and that he chose to do it without warning because he wanted the surprise of the ending to be the same kind of surprise the series had always delivered. He did not want a farewell tour. He did not want months of speculation about how the story would end. He wanted the ending to land the same way a major character death had always landed in the comic. Suddenly, without preparation, and with complete commitment. The timing of the comic's ending is worth noting. In July of 2019, the television show was between seasons, with season 10 scheduled to premiere in October. Andrew Lincoln had already departed. Carl was already dead on the show. The Whisperer arc was underway. The show was deep into its Angela Kang era, which was critically strong but commercially diminished, and the man who had created the entire universe had decided it was over. Kirkman's relationship with AMC had deteriorated significantly by that point. He had departed his overall deal with the network and signed a new pact with Amazon Studios. The lawsuit over profit participation was ongoing, the comic ending cleanly and definitively, while the television show continued without him, without its lead actor, without the character that the comic had positioned as its emotional centerpiece, was a contrast that carried its own commentary. In the comic, Carl lived. He grew up. He had a family. He inherited his father's world. The story was about the possibility of rebuilding, and it ended with that possibility fulfilled. On the television show, Carl was dead. Rick was gone. The story was continuing not because it had somewhere to go, but because the infrastructure around it, the network, the production company, the licensing agreements, the spin-off plans, required it to continue. The creator had found his ending. The corporation had not. That gap between the creator's sense of completion and the institution's refusal to stop is one of the most telling details in the entire Walking Dead story. Kirkman knew when the story was done. He knew it was done because the story had arrived at the place it had been going since the first issue. Rick Grimes' son was alive, and the world was rebuilt, and the dead were no longer dominant. That was the ending. That was always the ending. The television show could not arrive at that ending because it had killed the character the ending depended on. And so it kept going, past the point where the source material existed to guide it, past the point where the creator was actively involved, past the point where the lead actor was on screen, into a territory that no one had mapped because the person who made the map had already declared the journey complete. There is a lesson in Kirkman's decision that extends beyond just The Walking Dead. There is something profoundly respectful about a creator who decides that the story's finished and ends it, even when the market would support continuing, especially when the market would support continuing. The comic was still selling well. The television show was still on the air. The franchise was still generating revenue. By every commercial metric, there was no reason to stop. But Kirkman stopped. He stopped because the story was over, and the fact that the television show could not stop, that the franchise could not stop, that the machine required feeding even after the creator had declared the meal complete, tells you everything about what The Walking Dead had become by 2019. It was no longer a story being told. It was a property being maintained. Kirkman, to his credit, was honest about the commercial realities throughout. He was never naive about the fact that the comic and the show existed in an entertainment marketplace. He had built a franchise. He had participated in its expansion. But when it came to the comic itself, the original thing, the thing he had started in 2003 when he was 24 years old, and had an idea about what happens to people when the world falls apart, he protected its integrity by giving it the ending it deserved. The television show, owned by a corporation and staffed by rotating creative teams working within a production structure designed to maximize output, did not have the luxury of that kind of creative decision-making. The show could not end when the story was done, because the show had become bigger than the story. The brand had consumed the narrative, and once that happens, once the commercial apparatus around a creative work grows larger than the work itself, the work becomes a function of the apparatus rather than the other way around. That inversion, the moment when the tail starts wagging the dog, is what happened to The Walking Dead. And Kirkman's decision to end the comic when he did, quietly, without fanfare, with an ending that was hopeful and complete and final, stands as a reminder of what might have been if the television show had been allowed the same kind of ending. An ending chosen by a creator rather than negotiated by a network. An ending that served the story rather than the franchise. An ending that arrived because the story had reached its natural conclusion, not because the numbers no longer justified continuing. The Walking Dead comic began in October of 2003 and ended in July of 2019. 193 issues, 16 years, one creator, one complete story with a beginning, middle, and end. The television show premiered in October of 2010, ran for 11 seasons, produced 177 episodes, cycled through 4 showrunners, and ended in November of 2022, not because the story was done, but because the ratings had declined enough that the continuation model was more profitable than the flagship model. The show ended so the spin-offs could begin. The comic ended because Robert Kirkman had finished telling his story. Those are 2 fundamentally different kinds of endings, and the difference between them is the entire distance between art and industry. There is a specific thing that happens to a television show when the audience stops trusting it, and it is worth understanding because it is the invisible force that turned The Walking Dead from a cultural phenomenon into a cautionary tale. The loss of trust does not look dramatic from the outside. It does not show up as a single event. It shows up as a gradual erosion, a quieting, a slow withdrawal of the emotional energy that viewers bring to a show they care about. When The Walking Dead was at its peak, the audience was active. They were engaged in a way that went beyond just watching. They were speculating about what would happen next. They were arguing on forums about character decisions. They were making fan art and writing analysis and organising viewing parties. The show was not just content people consumed. It was content people participated in. That participation was the show's greatest asset, more valuable than the ratings themselves, because participation is what makes a show feel culturally alive. What the dumpster fake-outs and the Negan cliffhanger and Carl's death and Rick's departure did, one after another, over the course of 3 years, was teach the audience to stop participating. Not all at once. Each betrayal of trust caused a different subset of the audience to pull back slightly, to invest a little less, to lower the emotional stakes they were willing to bring to the next episode. The viewer who had once leaned forward during tense scenes began leaning back. The viewer who had once gasped at a character death began shrugging. The viewer who had once cried when someone they loved was taken from the show began expecting it, then resenting it, then simply not caring. That progression, from investment to expectation, to resentment, to indifference, is the death spiral of audience trust, and it is almost impossible to reverse. You can fix the writing, you can replace the showrunner, you can bring in new characters and new storylines and new creative energy, but you cannot make someone care again once they have decided to stop caring. The decision to stop caring is a defense mechanism, and human beings do not voluntarily remove their defenses. They built those defenses because they were hurt, and asking them to take the defenses down is asking them to be vulnerable again in the exact same way they were vulnerable before they were hurt. This is what Angela Kang inherited. Not a show with bad writing because she fixed the writing. Not a show with bad characters because the characters were still there, and she gave them real material to work with. She inherited a show whose audience had been taught, through years of cynical creative decisions, that investing emotionally in The Walking Dead would lead to disappointment. And no amount of good writing can overcome that lesson once it has been learned. The character arcs that the later seasons attempted were constrained by this reality. Negan's redemption arc, which was genuinely one of the more interesting things the show attempted in its final years, was always fighting against the memory of what Negan had done, and more importantly, against the memory of how the show had used Negan's introduction to manipulate the audience. The audience was not just being asked to forgive Negan for killing Glenn and Abraham. They were being asked to forgive the show for the cliffhanger, for the months-long wait, for the graphic violence that felt like punishment rather than storytelling. The character rehabilitation required an audience rehabilitation that the show simply did not have enough time or goodwill remaining to accomplish. Daryl Dixon's later arc suffered from a different version of the same problem. Norman Reedus had been the show's biggest remaining star since Lincoln's departure, and the show leaned heavily on him. But Daryl as a character had been built around specific relationships that no longer existed. His bond with Rick, his friendship with Glenn, his complicated connection to Beth, his partnership with Carol. These were the relationships that had given Daryl emotional depth and narrative purpose. With most of those relationships removed or altered by deaths and departures, Daryl in the later seasons became a character defined more by what he had lost than by what he was building. Reedus brought everything he could to the role, and his physical, understated performance style remained compelling throughout. But the character felt increasingly unmoored, a man of great capability and great loyalty in a show that had taken away most of the people his capabilities and loyalties had been built around. Maggie's trajectory illustrates yet another version of this problem. Lauren Cohan had been one of the strongest performers in the ensemble for years, and Maggie's evolution from Herschel's sheltered farm daughter to a leadership figure in the Alexandria and Hilltop communities was one of the better long-form character arcs the show produced. But Cohan's contract disputes with AMC during season 9, which resulted in her departure for most of that season, disrupted the character's development at a critical moment. When Maggie returned in the later seasons, the show had to rebuild her presence from a standing start, reintroducing a character that the audience had already said goodbye to once. The emotional continuity was broken, and while Cohan performed beautifully in Dead City, the character she was playing was not quite the same character the audience had fallen in love with. These are not failures of talent, they are failures of stewardship. The actors were doing their jobs. The writers, particularly under Kang, were doing solid work. The problem was structural. The production apparatus around the show, the network's budget decisions, the showrunner turnover, the franchise expansion strategy had created conditions where even talented people making good creative choices could not overcome the accumulated damage. There is one more dimension of The Walking Dead's decline that does not get discussed enough, and it connects directly to the reference script's analysis of how success changes creative conditions. The Walking Dead in its golden age was made under a specific kind of pressure that the later seasons simply did not have. The first few seasons were made by a show that did not know if it would continue. Darabont was fighting for every dollar. Mazzara was running the show in the shadow of Darabont's firing, aware that his own position was contingent on performance. The early Gimple seasons were made by a show that was ascending, with the energy and ambition that comes from knowing you are building something the audience has not seen before. By season 7 and beyond, that pressure was gone. The show had achieved a kind of untouchable commercial status. It was too big to cancel, too profitable to let die, too deeply embedded in AMC's financial structure to be treated with anything other than the institutional caution that comes with protecting a massive revenue stream. The show did not need to be great. It needed to be consistent. It needed to deliver episodes on schedule, hit its budget targets, generate enough viewership to justify its advertising rates, and avoid anything so creatively bold that it might alienate the casual viewers who kept the numbers where they needed to be. That is the creative death sentence that success can deliver. The show that had once been too hungry to be cautious became too successful to be brave. And a show that is too successful to be brave is a show that will, inevitably, become too safe to be interesting. The audience senses this shift even when they cannot articulate it. They feel the difference between a show that is fighting to be great and a show that is managing to be acceptable. And acceptable, in a world with an infinite amount of content competing for their attention, is not enough. The Walking Dead's ratings decline was not caused by any single decision. It was caused by the cumulative effect of dozens of decisions, each one made for defensible reasons, each one marginally reducing the show's creative ambition, until the total distance travelled was so great that the show the audience was watching bore only a superficial resemblance to the show they had fallen in love with. The names were the same, the setting was the same, the walkers were the same, but the feeling was different, the care was different, and the audience knew it, even if the metrics and the focus groups and the network executives did not. We have spent a lot of time talking about what went wrong, about the decisions that broke the show, and the structures that allowed those decisions to be made, about budgets and lawsuits and cliffhangers and corporate machinery. All of that is necessary because the decline of The Walking Dead is a specific story with specific causes, and those causes deserve to be documented clearly. But if we are going to sit with this story, if you're going to fall asleep to it or let it play in the background, or carry it with you in whatever way you carry these things, then we need to spend some time with what was lost. Not the ratings, not the cultural position, not the franchise potential. What was lost was a feeling, a specific, identifiable, irreplaceable feeling that the show produced during its golden age. A feeling that anyone who was watching during those years will recognize immediately, and that nobody who only knows the later seasons has ever fully experienced. That feeling starts with a man waking up in an empty hospital. The first episode of The Walking Dead opens with Rick Grimes lying in a hospital bed. He does not know what has happened. He does not know that the world has ended. He wakes up, and the room is dark, and the flowers beside his bed are dead. And when he calls out for a nurse, nobody answers. He pulls the IV from his arm. He stumbles into the hallway. The lights are off. The floors are dirty. There is a gurney overturned against a wall. And then he reaches a set of double doors at the end of a corridor, and painted across them in block letters are the words, "Do not open, dead inside." And from behind those doors, fingers reach through the gap. Grey, rotting fingers, grasping at air. That image, Rick Grimes standing alone in a dead hospital, looking at those fingers pushing through the crack in those doors, is the image that launched the entire franchise. It is the most iconic shot in the show's history, and it works because it is perfectly simple. A man who does not understand what has happened, standing at the threshold of a world that has become something unrecognizable. The audience learns the rules of this new world exactly as Rick does. They are as confused and as frightened and as alone as he is. There is no exposition. There is no voiceover explaining the zombie apocalypse. There is just a man, a hallway, and the fingers of the dead reaching for the living. Frank Darabont understood something that the later showrunners did not always understand. He understood that the horror of The Walking Dead was not in the walkers. The walkers were the setting. The horror was in the silence. The horror was in the absence of everything that used to be there. The empty hospital, the empty streets, the overturned cars, the bodies wrapped in sheets on the loading dock behind the building. The world had ended quietly, while Rick was asleep, and what remained was a silence that was somehow louder than any amount of screaming. When Rick rides a bicycle through the empty streets of his neighborhood in that first episode, when he finds his house and discovers that his wife and son are gone, when he sits on the front steps and weeps because he does not know if the people he loves are alive or dead, the show is not asking the audience to be thrilled. It is asking the audience to feel what Rick feels: the desolation, the confusion, the desperate, clutching hope that somewhere out there, someone he loves is still breathing. That emotional core, that willingness to sit with grief and confusion and hope in equal measure, is what defined the golden age. The show was never just a horror show. It was a show about people, and the horror was what revealed who those people really were. Think about the barn in season 2, the scene that people who watched it still talk about years later. Herschel's barn doors open, and the walkers shamble out one by one, and the group shoots them down one by one. And then the last walker steps into the light, and it is Sophia. Little Sophia, the girl they had been searching for across the entire first half of the season, the girl whose disappearance had been the emotional engine of the show for weeks. She had been in the barn the whole time. She was dead. She had been dead since before they started looking for her, and Rick, because nobody else could, stepped forward and put her down. Carol's scream when she saw her daughter, the way Rick's hand shook when he raised the gun, the complete, devastating silence after the shot. That moment works because the show had earned it through weeks of patient storytelling. The audience had lived with the hope of finding Sophia alive. They had watched Carol pray. They had watched Daryl nearly kill himself searching the woods. And the show had let them hope, genuinely hope, until the moment when the barn doors opened and the hope was taken away forever. That is honest storytelling. That is a show respecting its audience enough to let them feel something real, knowing that the feeling will hurt, and committing to the hurt because the hurt is the point. The hurt is what makes the story matter. Think about The Prison, Season 3, the first episode. Rick and the group have been wandering for months since the farm fell. They are exhausted, starving, running out of ammunition. They find the prison and they see it for what it could be. Walls, security, a place to stop running. The sequence where they clear the prison yard is the show at its most primal and most exciting. Rick with a rifle, Carl beside him, the group working together as a unit to take something from the dead and make it theirs. And then after the fighting is done, Beth and Maggie sing by the fire while Daryl keeps watch on the perimeter. And for one brief, quiet moment, these people are at peace. That peace never lasts on this show. It is always temporary. But the show understood that the temporary nature of peace is what gives it its power. If these people were never safe, then safety meant nothing. But they were safe sometimes, in stolen moments around campfires and in prison cells they'd made into something resembling home. And those moments of safety were the most human the show ever was. Herschel in the Flu arc, Season 4. The prison is tearing itself apart from the inside as a virus spreads through the population. Herschel, the veterinarian who had lost his farm and his leg and almost everything else, moved from cell to cell with a cloth mask over his face, treating the sick, comforting the dying, refusing to stop even as the death toll mounted. Scott Wilson played Herschel with a gentleness that was almost unbearable to watch during that arc, because the audience knew, the way audiences always know with this show, that gentleness in this world is borrowed time, and then too far gone. The governor at the gates, Herschel on his knees, the governor saying, "Look at the prison, look at what Rick has built, look at what these people have made," and then taking Michonne's katana and driving it into Herschel's neck, the prison falling, the group scattering, Lizzie and Mika running, Beth screaming, Carl and Rick stumbling away together, Rick telling his son not to look back, just keep walking. The show never fully recovered from the fall of the prison, not in a quality sense because there were great episodes after that, but in an emotional sense, the prison represented something that the show would never quite recapture. It was the last time the group felt whole, the last time all of the characters who defined the golden age were in the same place, alive, together, fighting for the same thing. After the prison fell, the group scattered, and they came back together eventually. But something had changed. The family had been broken, and even when the pieces were reassembled, the cracks were visible. Then Terminus. Season 5 opens with Carol Pelletier, the woman who had spent the first season cowering from her abusive husband, walking through the woods, alone toward a compound full of cannibals who have captured her family. She covers herself in walker guts for camouflage. She fires a bottle rocket into a propane tank. She single-handedly creates enough chaos to give Rick and the others a chance to fight their way out. When Daryl sees her afterward, when he runs to her and wraps her in his arms without a word, it is one of the purest emotional moments the show ever produced. No dialogue. Just two people who have become each other's family, reunited after believing they might never see each other again. Melissa McBride's performance across the full run of the show is one of the great underappreciated achievements in television acting. Carol Pelletier in Season 1 was a frightened woman who could not protect her daughter. Carol Pelletier in Season 5 was the most dangerous person in any room she entered. That transformation happened slowly, across years, episode by episode, loss by loss, and McBride played every single stage of it with complete truth. She never cheated, She never took shortcuts. When Carol smiled in the later seasons, there was always something behind the smile, something the audience understood because they had been there for every loss that had put it there. These are the things the Golden Age was made of. Not just good episodes, though the episodes were good. Not just good performances, though the performances were extraordinary. The Golden Age was made of accumulated care. The feeling that every moment mattered because the people making the show were paying attention to every moment. The feeling that when a character said something, it was because the writers had thought about who that character was and what that character would honestly say in that situation. The feeling that consequences were real, that time moved forward, that the things that happened in one episode shaped the things that happened in the next. That care was visible, the audience could see it, and when it began to disappear, they could see that too. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one more thing worth saying before we reach the end of this story, and it has to do with the people who made The Walking Dead what it was. Not the executives, not the showrunners, not the network that owned it. The people. The actors who showed up in Atlanta for 8 months a year, who spent hours in prosthetic makeup, who performed emotional scenes in 100-degree heat, surrounded by extras in zombie costumes. The writers who sat in rooms for weeks at a time, breaking stories about a world they had helped build. The crew members who worked 14-hour days making a television show that became one of the most watched programs on the planet. These people deserve better than the story they ended up in. Andrew Lincoln gave 9 years of his life to Rick Grimes. He moved his family across an ocean. He missed birthdays and holidays and first steps and school plays because he was in Georgia playing a sheriff's deputy in a zombie apocalypse. He committed to that role with an intensity and a sincerity that made Rick Grimes one of the definitive television characters of his generation. When he cried on screen, you believed it, because Lincoln was not acting. He was living in that character in a way that most actors never achieve, and most shows never deserve. Norman Reedus turned a character who was not in the source material, who was invented for the television show, into arguably the most popular figure in the franchise. Daryl Dixon was a creation of the writer's room, and Reedus made him his own through years of physical, largely non-verbal performance work that gave the character a soul the page alone could not have provided. When Daryl cried over Beth's body, when he reunited with Carol at Terminus, when he carried Rick out of danger for the 100th time, Reedus made each moment land because he had earned each moment through years of accumulated character work. Stephen Yeun was 26 years old when the show premiered. Glenn Rhee was, for 6 seasons, the heart of the show. The character who ran toward danger because other people needed him to. The character whose marriage to Maggie was one of the few genuinely hopeful things the apocalypse produced. Yeun played Glenn with a warmth and a decency that made his death in season 7 feel like a personal loss for millions of viewers. Yeun has gone on to an extraordinary career, including an Academy Award nomination for Minari, and there is a direct line from the emotional intelligence he brought to Glenn to everything he has done since. Melissa McBride's transformation of Carol Pelletier from a battered wife to a warrior to a woman haunted by the things survival had required her to become is one of the great long-form performances in television history. Lauren Cohan brought a fierce, grounded intelligence to Maggie that elevated every scene she was in. Danai Gurira made Michonne iconic through physicality and silence before the show ever gave her substantial dialogue. Chandler Riggs grew up on camera and gave the show everything it asked of him, including a death scene that should never have been written. These performances, these commitments, these years of work, they exist inside the episodes. They are not diminished by the show's decline. They are not erased by AMC's corporate decisions. They are not made less real by the ratings drops or the franchise fatigue or the lawsuits. The work is the work, and the work was often extraordinary. When people talk about The Walking Dead in the years to come, And they will because the show was too big and too influential to be forgotten. The conversation will always come back to two things. The first is how spectacularly the show rose, from a 6-episode gamble on a cable network to the most watched scripted series in American television. The second is how comprehensively it fell, from 17 million viewers to barely over 1 million, from cultural phenomenon to franchise obligation. But between the rise and the fall, there were moments of genuine greatness. Not approximate greatness, not greatness for a zombie show, genuine, unqualified greatness that stands alongside anything television produced in the same period. And those moments belong to the people who made them. Before we move on, if you are enjoying this, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. So what is The Walking Dead in the end? What is it when you look at the full picture? 11 seasons, 177 episodes, 4 showrunners, 6 spin-offs, multiple lawsuits, a peak of 17.29 million viewers, and a trough of barely more than 1 million. What is it when you hold all of those things in your mind at once and try to make sense of the whole? The honest answer is that it is 2 different shows sharing the same name. And the distance between those 2 shows is the whole story. The first show, the one that ran from 2010 to roughly 2016, was a genuine cultural phenomenon. It was the kind of show that does not come along very often, the kind that transcends its genre and becomes something that everyone watches and everyone talks about and everyone has an opinion on. It was not just the most popular zombie show ever made. It was, for a period of about 3 years, the most popular show on American television, full stop. It outrated the broadcast networks. It outrated the NFL on some nights. It dominated the cultural conversation in a way that cable dramas were not supposed to be able to do. And it earned that position through the quality of its storytelling. The golden age of The Walking Dead was not a fluke or a novelty or a fad. It was the result of genuinely talented people making genuinely excellent television under conditions that forced them to be creative and honest and willing to take real risks. Darabont's cinematic pilot, Mazzara's propulsive middle seasons, Gimple's early character work, the performances of Andrew Lincoln, Melissa McBride, Norman Reedus, Stephen Yeun, Lauren Cohan, Danai Gurira, and a supporting cast that was consistently stronger than any zombie show had a right to expect. The practical effects work of Greg Nicotero, which set a new standard for what television horror could look like. The willingness to kill major characters in ways that felt honest and irreversible and devastating. The show changed television. That is not an exaggeration. Before The Walking Dead, the conventional wisdom in the television industry was that cable dramas could be critically acclaimed or commercially successful, but rarely both at the same scale. Breaking Bad was the prestige benchmark, but its ratings, while strong for AMC, were a fraction of what the broadcast networks drew. The Walking Dead proved that a cable drama could compete directly with broadcast in terms of raw viewership, while maintaining a level of creative ambition that broadcast dramas rarely attempted. The Walking Dead was the first cable series to top the broadcast networks in the 18 to 49 demographic. It held that position for years. The success of the show gave AMC the leverage and the revenue to expand its programming slate, to take risks on new series, to position itself as a genuine competitor to the broadcast networks rather than a boutique alternative. The Walking Dead was, in a very direct financial sense, the show that built modern AMC. It also helped create the franchise model that now dominates the television landscape. The idea that a successful show should not just end, but should spawn spin-offs, prequels, sequel series, and expanded universe content was not invented by The Walking Dead, but the show demonstrated the model at a scale that the industry had not previously seen in scripted television. When you watch HBO develop House of the Dragon from Game of Thrones, or when you watch Disney develop multiple Star Wars series from the original films, you are watching an industry that learned at least partly from what AMC did with The Walking Dead. But the lesson AMC taught the industry came with a warning that the industry largely ignored, which is that franchise expansion works only as long as the original property maintains its integrity. The Walking Dead franchise expanded before the flagship show had reached a satisfying creative conclusion, and the result was a diluted brand serving a subdivided audience. The spin-offs drew smaller and smaller numbers. The franchise fatigue that multiple critics and fans identified by 2025 was not because the concept was exhausted. It was because the audience's emotional investment had been spent by the flagship show's mishandling of its own story, and that spent investment could not be transferred to new stories about the same world. The second Walking Dead, the one that ran from roughly 2017 to 2022, was a different thing entirely. It was a show running on institutional momentum rather than creative drive. It was a show whose lead actor had left, whose most promising young character had been killed, whose audience had been halved and then halved again, and whose creative leadership had changed hands 3 times. It was a show that was still capable of producing individual episodes of genuine quality. Angela Kang's best work demonstrated that clearly, but that had lost the thing that made those individual episodes feel like they were building towards something. The later Walking Dead was a show without a destination. It continued because it was continuing, because AMC needed it to continue, because the production infrastructure existed and the brand still had value, and the spin-off plans required the flagship to deliver characters and storylines that could be spun out into separate series. It was a show that existed to service a franchise rather than a franchise that existed to service a show. The numbers tell this story more efficiently than any amount of analysis. The show debuted to 5.35 million viewers. It peaked at 17.29 million. It finished at approximately 1.4 million. An unprecedented 75-episode streak of 10 million plus viewers, longer than the entire run of Game of Thrones, was burned through and discarded over the course of 3 seasons. The most dramatic ratings decline of any comparable show in television history. Worse than Grey's Anatomy over the same period. Worse than NCIS. Worse than The Big Bang Theory. Worse than Modern Family. Worse than American Idol. Those numbers than American Idol. Those numbers represent real people making real decisions. 17 million people cared about this show, enough to watch it live on a Sunday night. Over the years that followed, approximately 15.5 million of those people decided, one by one, that the show was no longer worth their time. Some left because of the Negan cliffhanger. Some left because of the filler. Some left because of Carl's death. Some left because Rick left. Some left because they just drifted away, the way people drift away from things that no longer feel essential. But they left, and they did not come back. Each of those departures was a small vote of no confidence in the show's stewardship of their attention and their emotional investment. And the cumulative weight of 15.5 million votes of no confidence is the most comprehensive judgment the audience could have delivered. More comprehensive than any review score. More comprehensive than any think piece. More comprehensive than anything said on social media. The audience did not need to explain why they left. Their absence was the explanation. The tragedy at the centre of the Walking Dead story is the same tragedy that sits at the centre of most stories about the collision between art and commerce. The show was at its best when it was fighting for its life, when the budget was tight, when the creative leadership cared deeply about the work, when the audience's investment was treated as a sacred trust rather than a resource to be exploited. And the show was at its worst when it had nothing left to prove, when the ratings were guaranteed, when the franchise was too big to fail, when every creative decision had to be filtered through the question of what would keep the machine running rather than what would make the story better. The golden age was forged by conditions that success had to destroy. The financial pressure that forced creative innovation was removed by the show's commercial dominance. The showrunner stability that would have protected the show's creative identity was prevented by AMC's corporate relationships with its creative leaders. The audience trust that made every episode feel like it mattered was broken by a series of cynical storytelling choices that prioritized engagement metrics over narrative honesty. None of this was inevitable. There is no law of television physics that says a show must decline in quality as it becomes more successful. Breaking Bad got better every season. Better Call Saul maintained extraordinary quality across 6 seasons. But those shows had stable creative leadership and network relationships that supported rather than undermined the creative vision. The Walking Dead had neither. What could have saved the show? The question is hypothetical and therefore unanswerable, but the contours of a different timeline are visible if you look. A timeline where AMC treated Darabont's budget needs as an investment rather than an expense. Where Mazzara's departure led to a genuinely collaborative transition rather than a replacement. Where Gimple was course-corrected after the dumpster fake-out rather than rewarded with continued creative control. Where Carl lived and Rick stayed and the show arrived at a version of the ending Kirkman had written for the comic. An ending where the survivors' children inherit a rebuilt world and the dead are finally defeated not by violence, but by persistence. That timeline does not exist. What exists is the timeline we got. The one where the show peaked and declined and ended and continued in scattered fragments across multiple spin-offs. Each one drawing a smaller audience, each one carrying a smaller piece of the original's weight. And yet, and this is the thing that matters most, the golden age still exists. Those episodes are still there. They're available to watch right now, exactly as they were when they first aired. The hospital, the barn, the prison, Terminus, Carol covered in walker blood, walking through smoke and fire to save her family. Rick telling Carl not to look back. Herschel moving from cell to cell, with a cloth mask, trying to keep people alive. Glenn's smile, Daryl's crossbow, Michonne's katana catching the light. Nothing that came after erased those things. The machine that The Walking Dead became did not reach back and take away what the hungry version of The Walking Dead had made. In the series finale of The Walking Dead, after the Commonwealth is saved, after the final battle is fought, after the last walker falls, there is a quiet moment that the show gives to Judith Grimes. She is a child. She has grown up in a world that was broken before she was born. She has lost her father, or at least she thinks she has. She has lost friends and homes and the kind of safety that children in the old world took for granted. And she looks out at the Commonwealth, at this community that has survived and is rebuilding. And she turns to her little brother, RJ, and says something simple. She says, "We get to start over. We are the ones who live." That line had been with the show for a long time. It comes from Rick Grimes. It was one of the things Rick said to Michonne during the years they built a life together in Alexandria before the CRM took him away. We are the ones who live. It was a statement of purpose. Not just that they had survived, though they had survived, through things that should have killed them 100 times over. It was that surviving meant something. That the act of continuing, of getting up every morning in a world that was trying to kill you and choosing to live anyway, was itself the point. In The Ones Who Live, the mini-series that brought Rick and Michonne back together, that line takes on its full weight. Rick has been gone for years. He has been a prisoner. He has tried to escape multiple times. He cut off his own hand during one attempt. He nearly took his own life. He had forgotten what his own son's face looked like, until Michonne brought him an engraved portrait and gave Carl back to him, and Michonne found him. Against every conceivable odd, she found him. She crossed an ocean of dead. She survived things that should have killed her, and when she found him, he tried to push her away, because he was afraid that if he let her back in and lost her again, the loss would destroy him permanently. There is a scene in that mini-series where Rick tries to explain this to Michonne. He tells her that after he was taken, he survived by dreaming about Carl, and then one day, Carl was gone from his dreams. Just gone, and he could not see his son's face anymore. So he started dreaming about Michonne instead. And then Michonne was gone too, and he could not live without her. Without her, he dies. He had figured out how to be dead and live. How to exist in a world where the people he loved most were out of his reach, and to keep breathing anyway, not because he wanted to, but because breathing was what his body did. Andrew Lincoln played that scene with such devastating honesty that it does not matter how you feel about the spin-off model, or the franchise strategy, or the corporate machinery of AMC. In that moment, it is just a man telling the woman he loves that he is afraid. Afraid that hope will come back and leave again. Afraid that the thing that kept him alive, the dream of her, will be replaced by the reality of her, and the reality can be lost in ways the dream cannot. Michonne's answer is the answer the show has been giving since its first episode. We go home. We figure out how to protect it together. That is how we make it all make sense. We love on each other as hard as we can while we can. That is what The Walking Dead was about. Underneath everything. Underneath the walkers and the violence and the betrayals and the cliffhangers and the corporate mismanagement and the declining ratings. It was about people choosing to love each other in a world that punished love. It was about building homes that could be destroyed, about forming families that could be torn apart, about saying, "I love you" to someone, knowing that tomorrow one of you might be gone. The show understood, at its best, that the apocalypse was not really the end of the world. It was the removal of everything that distracted people from the essential truth of being alive, which is that it ends. Everything ends. The walkers were just a metaphor for the thing that waits for all of us, the knowledge that the people we love will not be here forever, and neither will we. The golden age of the show was powerful because it sat with that knowledge, honestly. It let characters die, it let hope be crushed, and then it showed the people who survived getting up the next morning and choosing to keep going anyway. The series finale was not perfect. The franchise it launched was not perfect. The spin-offs have been uneven. The machine that AMC built around the show consumed much of what made it special. All of that is true. But the thing the show created, at its best, the feeling of caring about fictional people so deeply that their losses felt like your losses, the experience of sitting in a dark room and watching Rick Grimes wake up in an empty hospital, and feeling, genuinely feeling, the vertigo of a world turned upside down, that was real. That happened. That is part of the history of what television can do. The Walking Dead premiered on Halloween night, 2010. A man woke up in a hospital and the world was over. He found a bicycle and rode it through empty streets, past abandoned cars, and the scattered remains of a civilization that had fallen while he slept. He found a stranger named Morgan and his son Dwayne, and Morgan explained what had happened, and Rick listened with the expression of a man whose life has just been divided into before and after. 12 years later, in a park in the Civic Republic, Michonne found a portrait of herself carved into an old iPhone by a man named Benjiro. Rick had been coming to this man for years, asking him to draw the face of the woman he loved, the face he was terrified of forgetting. And there she was, looking at a drawing of herself that Rick had commissioned, because even after years of separation and despair, even after losing his son and his hand and his freedom, he had never stopped carrying her with him. That is what this show was at its best. Not the zombies, not the violence, not the shocking deaths, not the franchise, not the merchandise, not the cultural phenomenon, not the numbers. It was the quiet, desperate, unbreakable insistence that the people you love are worth fighting for, even when the world has ended, even when the dead walk the earth, even when every rational calculation says it is time to stop. The Walking Dead got a lot of things wrong over its 11 seasons. It broke its audience's trust. It squandered its cultural position. It made creative decisions that were driven by commerce rather than craft. It fumbled its ending. It scattered its legacy across too many spin-offs. It allowed the machine to consume the art. But it also got something right. Something that 17 million people recognised on a Sunday night in October of 2014. and that even the final 1.4 million recognized on a November night in 2022. Something that survives the decline and the disappointment and the corporate mismanagement and the legal battles and the franchise fatigue. It got the feeling right, the feeling of watching people you care about fight to stay alive in a world that wants them dead, the feeling of hope in a hopeless place, the feeling that love, stubborn and irrational and doomed and indestructible, is the only thing that matters when everything else is gone. Rick throws his message in a bottle into the river. The helicopter comes. He raises his arms. Michonne rides through the fog. The dead walk behind her. She does not look back. We are the ones who live. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.